Hey, what's up? How's it? Aloha, welcome to Culture Rise. My name is Makani. This is the space we get to share, talk, learn culture. I'm excited today because I spent 4 years in college. Nihongo maraheta desu kara ne. Sumimasen. Taking Japanese. I know. You're looking at me like, what? We're talking Japanese culture today with our good friend Nate from the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii. How are you, brother?
How's it? Thanks for having me.
Or as I should say, dozo yoroshiku hajimemashite.
Your Japanese is better than mine, bro. I tell you that much.
It's funny. This is what I learned in speaking Japanese is that just slur everything together and you sound like an ethnic speaker, right?
That's why when you go out drinking with the Japanese, you actually communicate better over the night. Yeah,
I like that. That's fun. I remember one of my professors at UH was like, just slur everything together. I was like, what do you mean? She's like. She goes, when you have to tell Japanese people, it's like, sumimasen, nihongo maraheta desu kara ne. She's like, yeah, like that. She goes, I don't even know what you said, but I know that you don't understand.
Yeah, exactly.
Japanese culture, Hawaii has such a huge relationship with Japanese culture. Do you know when the first Japanese came to Hawaii?
Yes, I do.
Well, there would be different waves, because we could talk about the first ones that went to Niihau, right?
Yeah.
We had Dr. Shintani on the show last season, and he was actually one of the original Shintanis, the beekeepers from Niihau. What other historical or writing documents Japanese in Hawaii? Well,
the main first wave of workers came in 1868. Wow. So about 150 years ago. We celebrated the 150th anniversary in 2018. But there were stories about people shipwrecking and kind of mistakenly finding...
No way.
Yeah, King Kalakaua wrote a story in one of his publishings about the man with the iron knife. And it was actually about a ship that got shipwrecked.
What?
Yeah, and then the captain had a sword. And for the people on Maui, they never saw metal work like that. So
I love stories like that. Where can we? Now I want to go look that up.
Yeah, just Google it. I found it online. So yeah, it's in one of his publishings of stories.
That's pretty crazy. And now, was that prior to immigrant Japanese coming in?
Yeah, a couple centuries before. But I mean, the real documented stuff is 1868.
See, now I'm thinking in my head, can you imagine you're on your boat or your ship and you're fishing from Japan and you just keep going. You're like, what are these islands over here?
And what's the chances of, like, in the middle of the Pacific, you just land on Maui, right?
So you're like, Maui of all places. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Waiakea High. Yeah.
Nice. Hawai'i Island,
yes,
Waiakea.
I'm a big island boy.
You just said Waiakea. I just reverted back to sleeping in the Waiakea High School gym during wrestling season, and the rain is coming in the top, and we're in the middle. Man, Waiakea. Growing up in Hilo, right? Ethnic backgrounds for you?
So I'm full Japanese.
Nice.
Fourth generation on both sides.
Wow.
So all from Honoka'a. So Hamakua Plantation.
Wow. Was Hawaii Island, because this is always intriguing to me, that Hawaii Island associates a lot with Japanese. Did they go there first?
It was one of the early stops. Hamakua Plantation was one of the early ones. But they actually came in through Honolulu Harbor and then got
filtered
through there.
Because I remember, in fact, my grandfather used to work the Hamakua sugar mill elevator when he was like 6 or 7 years old, right? But he would always talk about there's such a huge Japanese population in Hawaii Island.
Yeah.
Fourth generation, what is that?
Yonsei.
Yonsei.
Yeah, Yonsei.
Your parents, first generation here.
My great-grandparents would be the first generation here. Right. And then all in Honoka'a, and then my parents moved to Hilo, and I was born in Hilo. So.
Wow. Growing up in the household, was it very Japanese?
Actually, no.
Or very local?
So, yeah, I grew up way more local.
Wow.
Like, I wasn't connected to Japanese culture other than maybe bon dance and simple stuff like that, and the food, of course. But, I didn't grow up super connected, and it wasn't until I got into my adulthood that I kind of started reconnecting a little bit.
When you started to realize, okay, so this is the question I always ask, when did you realize, it's a weird question, but when did you realize you were Japanese? Not physically, just
culturally or
Yes.
just in general. I think, I think in Hawaii growing up, well, on Big Island, you kind of always kind of know, right? And people are mixed, but you still know you're Japanese or Chinese or Hawaiian, you kind of know that. So I don't think I think I always knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't until a little bit later that I actually started to understand what that could mean. Yeah.
I see. Do you remember things now in your adult life, you getting in touch with your ethnicity? Do you look back growing up thinking, that's why they did that, right?
Yeah. Of course, with my grandma and,
what are things you remember?
Well, just some of the, annual, like, Bon dance was like the big one, and my grandma was super involved with that. So she would like go around the island. You know how it kind of circles the island. She would make my grandpa drive
the Bon dance
her,
circuit.
Yeah, on the circuit, and she was one of the old ladies in the middle of the circle, like that was teaching everybody. But she taught us, and at the time I didn't understand what I was doing. I just thought it was fun. But yeah.
Well, that thought. We're getting into Japanese culture right now on Culturized. Bringing you what matters. Viewers can receive the Star Advertiser digital full access subscription for just $9.95 per month. Go to staradvertiser.com and click on subscribe. Use the code AHITHING. Hey, thanks for joining us right here in Culturized. We're talking, sharing, learning culture, and we're getting into Japanese culture. Japanese relationship with Hawaii is huge. We're sitting down with our good friend Nate. We're talking Bon dance. No matter if you're Japanese or not, we looked forward to Bondori, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, it's like, I remember growing up on Lanai, it would be really cool to see every ethnicity pounding mochi, right, and doing stuff. So your grandmother was, she went the circuit, Hawaii Island, and that's a huge circuit.
Yeah, it's a big circuit.
How many Hangwanji on Hawaii Island?
I don't know exactly. And of course, she may have, from Honoka'a, she might have not done like the ka'u one. That might have been a little too far of a drive, but she tried to make kona. She tried to make, waimea.
So do you remember the dance? What do you remember the dance?
The shovel, the shovel. The shovel, the cutting.
Is there a name for it?
I don't know.
See, we always
wipe your forehead, shovel, that kind of stuff. But that's how my grandma taught it to us, right?
Yes.
She's saying like you gotta wipe and shovel, and
I love that. So Bon dance. What other things do you remember about growing up? And now you're like, that was grandma. That was my parents. That was the Japanese part.
Simple stuff like my grandma's house was in Honoka'a, so they had like a old style fudo.
Whoa!
So yeah, I mean like learning as a kid how to actually fudo, right? You wash outside on the stool and you get clean before you go into the water, right? And just stuff like that, small things like that were around and just in my grandparents.
See, I think
home.
that those little things are the most amazing things that make us who we are today. Even as simple as, I always want to know, is it the Japanese? Who was it what Asian culture, we took off our slippers before in the house?
Yeah, I don't know. I think all of them. I mean, Japan obviously does it, but I think a lot of other Asian cultures is you take your shoes off.
But you know what I like about Japanese? Their foresight of that little thing. But when you go in the house, you take off your slippers to point the other way.
Yeah. Right? Well, that's local style. Do that. Slippers all over the place outside. But
that's what I mean. I remember first going to Japan, and we go into wherever we're going, and there's always the person that greets you at the door, and I see them turning slippers.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Yeah.
And then they said, that's how you do it. You take your slippers off, you point it the other way, so when you leave, that's the most brilliant thing, foresight of Japanese. So you had Bon dance, the fudo.
Yeah.
Now, explain fudo, because not a lot of people realize the steps.
Yeah, so it's your bath. Usually it's an outdoor bath, and it's where you actually wash yourself outside of the water. I mean, outside of the tub.
Right.
And you use the water, you scrub everything, get clean first, and then in the tub is like piping hot water. I mean, it was like just short of boiling, I think, at my grandparents' house. And then once you're real clean, and you're supposed to be real clean, then you go and soak and you relax.
See, even that foresight, like nobody thinks about. You're sitting in a tub, and this always freaks me out when people are in a tub and they're soaping themselves. You're sitting in your dirty water.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And I always say, think about what the Japanese did. You wash yourself first, even like washing dishes. Wash yourself first, then rinse, and then.
Well, because everybody uses the same water, so like of course my grandpa's last, and then if we never get clean and he can see the film on the water, then he gets mad, right? Like so. Because we're all using the same tub and it's still hot. And usually the old school style had like an actual wood fire under it, keeping it warm. But yeah, so, we would have to, as kids, learn how to like just be real clean before we jump into that.
So you were actually lucky to be fourth generation and to experience stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Because pretty far removed already at fourth generation. Like it's you're talking 4 cycles of kids,
But the fact that they did these little things, anything else that you can remember that was very Japanese growing up?
Besides like going to temple occasionally, doing that kind of stuff, learning how to do the incense and that kind of things. Those are the
Every one of my Japanese friends went to Japanese school. Summer school.
Oh yeah, I never. No.
Wow, you got
That's
lucky.
why my Japanese sucks. It's terrible.
And I remember all my Japanese friends. Some would go, I gotta go Hangwanji. Why? I had summer school. For what? I gotta go learn to be Japanese.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. This is Culturized. This is where we share and learn and talk story. Japanese have been in Hawaii, documented, undocumented. I'm still tripping out on Kalakaua, writing that story about the Japanese and the sword. But we're gonna get into it more right here on Culturized. Aloha Termite and Pest Control, your local and leading pest and termite control solution in the state. Always providing you superior service with Aloha. For all your money needs, Hawaiian Financial Federal Credit Union is here for you. Visit HYCC.com. That's hi-fi, letter C, letter U.com. I'm excited because we're talking Japanese culture. We know that the Japanese have had so much influence here in Hawaii. Our good friend Nate from the Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii in Manoa, but we're talking how you grew up. I think it's amazing because you're fourth generation and you got to experience these things and things we don't usually think about. Taking off our slippers, experiencing the proper protocol into a furo. And we know food, obviously food. We favorite Japanese food. Let's go cultural Japanese, not local Japanese.
Okay. The funny thing is now it's sushi. But I never used to eat like raw fish until I got like older. Yeah, no growing up, I never used to eat the stuff. Well, and I was like surrounded in Hilo, but I never did eat raw fish until later. But now it's like, sushi is my favorite. But you got the like small favorites like tamago meshi, the raw egg with the hot rice, that kind of stuff. Is I don't know if it's traditional, but that's like
your grandma used to make stuff like that.
Yeah.
I remember going to Lahainaluna High School. We had a Japanese cafeteria workers, and they would always, as soon as the rice was done, they would always make me a bowl, hot, with the egg inside.
Yeah, gotta be piping hot rice.
Like, come.
Yeah.
And I remember that. Food-wise, we got a lot of local foods that are Japanese influence, of course. We were talking to Lanai earlier about tempura.
Yeah.
Right? Other things... what other Japanese? I'm totally brain farting right now. Japanese foods, sushi. We talked about tempura, but they have seasonal foods. What is the? They tie the seaweed into a bowl.
The kombu. Kombu maki. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Was that? There were certain times there were certain foods.
Yeah. So like New Year's, of course, is like where you have the big one where you eat ozoni, the mochi soup, right? You make
that's
mochi soup. Like. There's other stuff like nishime was kind of considered almost like a funeral-ish.
Oh, no way.
Well, in Hilo,
that was
the funerals,
style.
That's what you would have is nishime, right? So,
wow.
But a lot of it is, I think maybe we lost some of the seasonality here. But when you go to Japan, you'll see it.
Yeah, it's totally.
You kind of just get oden in the summer, right? You got to wait till it's cold and then you can get the soup oden.
I'm trying to think in my head now all these Japanese traditions I would learn. The food, of course. The bamboo.
Kadomatsu, yeah.
That was for
New Year's, for good luck.
Year's.
Yeah, it's for good luck and strength.
Oh, eating is it ahi during New Year's? Is that a Japanese?
Yeah, well, it's like redfish. Usually,
just
the way I
redfish.
learned growing up was like you need some kind of redfish, and it could be like onaga. You could get like a.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, as long as it's red.
But for some reason, local people, oh no, let's just make it
Sashimi,
ahi,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's every New Year. That, and what is it called again? The bamboo?
Kadomatsu.
If you go to a Japanese house. But it's funny because you go to Don Quixote and they're selling them now.
Yeah, longs get them.
I remember our neighbors, we lived near the Hongwanji, and every year they would make that, and it would just be first come, first serve.
Yeah. Like you'll see people to this day, like, you know, around places in Honolulu by the first, they go pick bamboo and then make their own.
What's the, do you know the thought process behind that, or what's the cultural
Well, I
significance of
think, you know, for a lot of it, in Shinto, a lot of the kami, the gods, are based in nature. So I think they find, you know, certain plants, certain things have certain characteristics, and that kind of is probably where it got driven from.
I like that. I like that. Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii, as what's one of the things that you get? What's the main thing you guys share? Of course, it's culture, but
well, the main thing that we try to share are our cultural values that were kind of brought over with like our great grandparents.
Some of those values, like
one big one I've been kind of talking about lately is sekinin, which is responsibility, or kuleana, right?
Wow.
Like it's all kind of the same linking cultural value, and that's one that like all different cultures kind of have the same thought about responsibility and what we should be doing.
Sekinin?
Sekinin.
Sekinin. Responsibility. That's kind of going to be, I think, the theme of this season, but responsibility. Now, is it responsibility like yard, family? Hold that thought, because I want to talk about that. I love the fact that there's a responsibility, and it's a very cultural thing. Thank you so much for joining us. All kinds of things coming up. We're talking food, culture, and everything Japanese on Culturized.
Tropical Wholesale, home where vinyl is final. Call us today for our latest specials at 808-592-2000. That's 808-592-2000.
Hey, thanks a lot for joining us. This is Culturized. We're learning Japanese culture a lot. Even in our daily life, we're talking about as local people, growing up local, right? Yes, sometimes we're like you, 4 generations removed, but at the same time, if you really think about it, we've been living a Japanese culture, from taking off your slippers to eating the food, values. We just talked about the value of responsibility. What was the word again?
Sekinin.
And is it the responsibility to family or like cleaning the yard? Anything?
I mean, well, to me, cleaning the yard is a responsibility to your family, right? You know, that kind of taking care of things could be your community, your neighbors, your family, the state, the world. All of that falls under your responsibility.
So not just within the family or the culture, it's responsibility. What other values do you folks share?
Another one that's been kind of big this last year is gaman, which is like quiet endurance, to endure through hardship, you know, that kind of stuff. So
quiet, just the quiet endurance, just the term is amazing.
Yeah.
Explain a little bit more about why that's important. Quiet? That's amazing. I'm just tripping out on that. How does that apply to your life?
Well, I think for me personally, you know, like this last year has been very challenging for a lot of people, but, you know, we have to, as, you know, you have to have the sekinin, the responsibility to take care of each other. But you also everybody had to deal with different challenges, but everybody's dealing with it. So our thing is like, if we can all just kind of move forward, that's a major part.
So that kind of, now I'm thinking about it, because, you know, even our parents, and we know other older Japanese men, they're very like that. We think they're just very bushido, but they're just being quiet.
Quiet, yeah.
Wow. Other values that Japanese have.
Gambate, right? You know, go for broke. The whole charge 'em. You know, like, you know, it's.
That's why I'm always amazed at Japanese, because at one point they're very like, you know, quiet like that, and just very observe everything, but at the same time they're like gambate, like we all gambate kudasai, right? That's just in anything.
Do your best, right?
Wow.
Do your best in whatever you do. Try to be as good as you can be in whatever task, whether it's cleaning the yard, right? Mow the grass the best way you can mow the grass, right?
What values do you share yourself personally that you involve in your life? I mean, I know you share it at the Cultural Center. I know you share it within programs, but is there things now in your adult life, like you said, you realized, I knew I was Japanese, but now you realize the cultural value of being Japanese.
Sure.
In your adult life now, do you try and put a lot of that into it?
Yeah, I think I just started, I worked at the Cultural Center before, came back back in January. So one big one for me recently is a value called giri, which is the sense of duty.
Whoa.
And I think for me, you know, being a yonsei, so a kind of younger leader in our community, and now at the Culture Center, I feel that sense of duty that I gotta, you know, try and do my best at this job, because the whole community is kind of, you know, behind me, which is great. But there's a bit of that sense that I need to do my best.
Okay, that's another. They look at you. I mean, you're a young guy, but do you now
Kind of
have third, second, and first generation looking at you, going, "Who's this boy?"
Yeah.
Running the Japanese culture.
Yeah,
What's the pressure like? Because
the
Japanese family pressure is.
The pressure, it's a supportive pressure, so it's a good pressure. But it's supportive, but there's, you know, some hope and expectation that things will, you know, be good, you know, and that's what I feel. Yeah.
Wow. Martial arts. Were you ever into martial arts?
I used to do Aikido when I was a kid, but I was more like a baseball player, but like more just regular sports. Yeah.
We're talking Japanese values right here in Culturize, Japanese culture, its relationship to Hawaii. There's so much more we can talk about when it comes to Japanese culture. Think about things you do on a daily basis that you're really not sure, like that. I'm going to go back to it. As simple as taking off your shoes before you go in the house. I challenge you to figure out what Asian community gave that to us. You want to learn more about culture? Hit up our extended version on YouTube. Go to culturize.com is the website. Thank you so much for joining us, Nate. Thank you very much for taking the time
Mahalo.
to share with us your culture, not only local Japanese, but Japanese Cultural Center of Hawaii, right here on Culturized. Hey, what's up? How's it? Aloha, it is me, Makani. Welcome to the extended version of Culturized. Excited. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're learning and talking and sharing Japanese culture. Think about it. There's a lot of things in our local life that is very Japanese. You may not know. That's why we're sitting with my good friend Nate talking about that. We talked about a multitude of things. Japanese influence in Hawaii. You know, even the differences with Japanese national and local Japanese. Japanese love Hawaii.
They do.
Japanese nationals. I think there's more halal in Japan than there are in Hawaii. What's the Nihonjin? Do Japanese nationals come to the Cultural Center?
Yeah, they
Wow.
do. They do. They're interested in our history, especially stuff went around World War II, the internment, the soldiers.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
That's an interesting topic for them to come and learn about. Yeah.
That's, you know, I thought about it. That's what they would do. They would come, but it always intrigues me that a Japanese national would go to the Japanese Culture Center. But now you just answered the question. In your opinion, why do you think they love Hawaii so much? What is it?
I think the number one reason is that we share in Hawaii a lot of the same values they share, and because they're on the island too, just a real big island, bigger island. Some of that culture of being on an island kind of transitions, and they feel comfortable here. I think that's the main thing.
Hula, every time I go to Japan to dance, I'm always amazed at how great they are at everything they do, right? They're going to learn hula, and they're going to be really, really good at it. They're going to learn Hawaiian music. They're going to be really, really good at it. In the Cultural Center, do you guys have, is it just regular features, or do you guys change different things that you come and learn?
Yeah, we like to change. There's some permanent exhibits as far as our journey here, and there's a permanent exhibit about the internment camp that was in Honouliuli.
How many were there on Oahu, or in Hawaii in general?
Well, there are a lot of detention centers all across the state, but then most of them ended up, if anything, at Honouliuli, which is in Kunia.
Right. So if you guys ever going take it like the Eva cutoff.
Yeah, if you take, if you take the Kunia,
the north,
go
that's
up
right.
Kunia, it's on the left hand side in one of those valleys.
Is it still? I mean, not intact, but is it? Do they recognize it? Does the state recognize it?
Oh, it's a national park now.
Wow.
Yeah, it got switched, recognized as a national monument. There's not much in there. It's a lot of overgrown bushes, but there's still some existing slab structures and paths that you can see.
Would you guys take that over?
Yeah.
More responsibility?
Thank goodness it's with the NPS. So it's preserved for perpetuity. But we're hoping next year to start taking groups in there again and touring the area.
So we talk about all these influences in Hawaii. Probably one of the biggest influences, speaking of war, go for broke, right?
Yeah.
Is there one still alive, or did they all pass away?
No, there's some veterans. In fact, a gentleman from the MIS, Military Intelligence Service, is dropping by our center to do a little interview with us. So there are a few veterans around, but a lot of them are in their late 90s or even early 100s at this point.
Wow. Do you guys have a exhibit?
Yeah, we have an exhibit dedicated to them, but we also work with partner orgs. There's a lot of organizations that are specific to the veterans, so we kind of work with them.
I think Lanai, weren't you in a movie?
Yeah.
Go for broke.
I played you guys' teacher.
Is that in
Go for broke.
Go for broke?
See, I don't know where I was going. They actually called both of us. I couldn't do it, and I was like, I was supposed to play the Hawaiian friend of a go for broke soldier, and anyway, but huge go for broke. I'm thinking of all the things that of course, World War II, go for broke. What other things has they given to Hawaii?
Well, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's banks that came out of our community, Central Pacific Bank.
Are you serious?
Yeah, they're started by because
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Tanomoshi, which is the community style of lending, right? We all put our money together, and then when you need some money, you can take it out, but you got to put it back. That kind of grew into Central Pacific.
Me and my brothers tried to do that one time. It lasted for like a month.
Yeah. I seen people do like travel Tanomoshi, like everybody starts contributing, and then for a trip, and then when it's ready, they have a pot of money they can use to.
So that is a Japanese concept.
Yeah.
That's how they created all the restaurants in Hawaii.
Yeah.
No way.
They would lend that. Yeah. So a bunch of them would put the money, and then say if Lanai was like his turn to start his restaurant, he would take out the money, start it, and then he would replenish, and then next time is yours. Zippies, yeah. It's all old school style lending, and then Central Pacific kind of started out of that.
That's
style.
a trip. Well, of course they had to go bigger because some people probably weren't putting back. But wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So many things that the Japanese had given to Hawaii. Japanese. What is your guys' latest exhibit?
Well,
prior.
Yeah, right now we're trying to virtualize or do virtual tours of our exhibit. So we're hoping we're going to start filming pretty soon, and hopefully it'll roll out in the fall so that classes. We used to host about 3,000 to 4,000 kids a year.
Wow.
But with that all stopped, so hopefully we can get back into the classroom.
What kind of classes were you guys doing?
Mostly elementary school, and they would come and do a tour of the facility and the exhibits.
Do you guys do workshops?
We plan to again. Yeah, we do cultural workshops. So kumuhimo, ikebana, calligraphy. Yeah.
Wow. So ikebana,
flower
arrangement.
Yeah.
And what was the other one you said before that?
Kumuhimo is like a craft, like kind of a craft style. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Making stuff. Yeah.
I remember emceeing. I think what's the is it Cherry Blossom? What's the Japanese pageant?
Cherry Blossom Festival. Yeah.
I had to go with them to watch the girls learn how to tie the
kimono obi.
The obi.
Yeah.
That is everything. I'm amazed that Japanese do. There's protocol to it. There's ways to tie it. There's ways to stand. I mean, do you guys do workshops like that? I mean,
we used to, yeah, and hopefully we'll start doing it again. One big one that we're trying to do in the fall is Shichigo-san, which is the ones for kids, the kimono dressing for kids. So Shichigo-san, so 753. right?
Oh,
when they're
okay.
at
Yeah,
those
yeah, yeah,
ages,
yeah,
they
that's right.
put on the kimono, take their pictures.
Speaking of ages, every local person does it. When a man turns
Yakudoshi.
Yeah.
Yeah. 40. Well, over here it's 41. Yeah.
what is it supposed to be?
Well, it's 42.
Okay.
But in Japanese style, when you're born, you're already a year old because you were
that's right.
in the womb for a year, right?
Look at
So
that. See? You-
41. We have a little pamphlet if people are like interested in knowing what the local tradition is
Yeah.
localized too, right? It's different here.
I like that. Also, I'm thinking about when we were in school. Maybe you guys did it. Remember, we used to have. I'm thinking of these challenges we used to have. I don't know if you remember, Lanai, but the Geta slipper.
Oh, where everybody's like
Yeah,
connected.
exactly.
Oh, I don't know if that's us. I don't know. If that might be just a fun game.
But they did have the slipper with the
with the geta, the risers.
And then I was like, who wanted to break all of our ankles and make geta slippers and put 5 kids in it?
I'm guessing there was a purpose to it back in the day. You know, maybe
Teamwork, right?
high water or something.
I'm always
Puddles.
impressed. I'm always impressed that the tubbies,
yeah.
right? What other things have we think about this? Come on, you guys, Japanese things. And you guys, tubbies. There's food. The kimono. Bocha. Slangs.
Yeah, bocha. I don't even know the origin of the word, but I just know if you told Nihonjin bocha, they would not know what it is. So I'm assuming that evolved at the plantation, but also too because of the way immigration happened with the plantation, and it stopped in 1924. There's a significant break of people coming in. So like a lot of the old traditions got kind of like time capsuled here. So people from Japan, when they come, they trip at our bondans because they don't do it like how we do it. And it's a lot of things got preserved here, like a time capsule because everybody came, it stopped.
Wow.
You know, and
I didn't realize that.
yeah.
Bombay.
See. Yeah, I don't know. The slangs are
And it sounds very Japanese if you think about it.
And it could be like an old Japanese word that maybe had died off over time. You know,
Make, right?
Obake.
Right.
Obake, yeah. Obake is still around, but yeah, it's
a lot of people don't realize. Well, Okinawa, Japan.
yeah.
Some think same. You talk to an Okinawan. Oh no,
very different. Yeah,
you talk to a Japanese. Oh no, they're from there. We're from here.
Yeah.
They speak the same language, or is it?
They actually have their own language.
Wow.
Yeah, Uchinanchu. They have their own language that kind of is sort of people are trying to revive it.
Wow.
But they were their own kingdom,
right?
And then they got kind of colonized by Japan, and then so yeah, they view themselves as very separate. Yeah.
So see there, another thing you learned, because we were talking earlier on another show about Samoan culture and how Tonga and Samoa, and they're close to each other. So Okinawa and Japan were always warring against each other. So eventually it was Japan.
Yeah,
and then
took it over, and then now they speak Japanese there, and they're basically a prefecture, but they were a separate entity. Yeah.
Wow.
And they did have their own language and all that.
Very, very interesting. Again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge of Japanese culture, not only local, but the values of Japanese, which is always funny because I think any native culture, we have the same values, but it's our responsibility. Like you said, I envy you, but I don't envy you because you are you're the keeper of this Japanese Culture Center tradition.
One of the many. Yeah, one of the many.
It's such a task. So respect to you for that. If you're joining us, this is the extended version of Culturize. We're talking Japanese culture. You got any questions? Hit us down below. Japanese Culture Center of Hawaii. Our good friend Nate Kyoto. So thank you very much. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. Ja mata. Aloha.